First, to our top story. Tim Cook personally called out Facebook in the midst of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, saying he wouldn't be in the social network's position given Apple's approach to privacy. Zuckerberg responded by calling Cook's remarks extremely glib. Now Apple has done it again, this time at its annual Worldwide Developers Conference, showcasing a new system that will make it more difficult for companies to gather data on users as they surf the web. In Apple software updates later this year, the Safari web browser will show a pop-up window asking users for permission before loading share buttons from social networks, including Facebook. This announcement came the same day that Facebook disputed a New York Times report about how it shares data with mobile phone makers. The report claims Facebook struck deals with device manufacturers that allowed them full access to information on users and their friends. Joining us now from Washington, Stefanie Miller, analyst at Hite Capital Markets. With me here in the studio, we've got our Bloomberg Tech executive editor, Tom Giles. Stefanie, I want to start with you. Apple Senior Vice President Craig Federighi said this was Apple's answer to clever and relentless data companies, and saying that this would make it dramatically more difficult for them to gather data on us. Is this going to hurt Facebook?
It's hard for me to imagine that it will, in the same way that it's been hard for me to imagine any of this news could really hurt Facebook. At the end of the day, people really like Facebook, and they like the products and services that it offers, and so people read these stories, or they hear that Apple might be making it harder for them harder for Facebook to follow users around the web, but at the end of the day, people still use Facebook in droves.
At the end of the day, Tom, is it more symbolic?
Well, this definitely gives Apple the opportunity to claim some moral high ground, right? And Apple has done this before multiple times. They had the standoff with the FBI. They really want to be known as a company that cares about your data, cares about your privacy, and is willing to go to the mat on it. They did that with the FBI, and they've definitely made hay in light of the controversy surrounding Facebook. My question is, to what extent are people really going to pay attention when Apple gives you that opportunity to say, no thanks, don't want to share this information with Facebook? How much are people going to really take advantage of that and pay heed?
That said, these companies have two completely different business models, and Mark Zuckerberg pointed that out. Apple makes money by selling fairly high-end devices. Facebook makes money on advertising. Our Caroline Hyde spoke with Tony Fadell, a former Apple and Google executive who's been out there talking about the problems with tech addiction, the responsibility of companies like Apple, but he said that this move by Apple towards Facebook is a good one. Take a listen.
Facebook, in some ways, people are saying that they're exploiting that, and they're not being as good to their customers or their users as they should be. And so I think this war is ever going to be there of, are you serving your user or are you serving your advertiser customer? And I think that, Apple is taking the high road here, saying it's about security and privacy and not being tracked. And I think they're absolutely right about that. And we can see what Facebook's doing in the press about apologizing and trying to fix things. I think they have a long way to go.
Stefanie, let's talk about the bigger picture here. Now that we also have this New York Times report that Facebook shared user data, friend data with phone makers without disclosing it. If public trust is degraded in Facebook and yet people continue to use it anyway, at some point are those people a flight risk down the line? Are they likely to use the next best thing that comes along if their trust in Facebook and their, how much they like Facebook continues to decline?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's hard to see right now with so many users, and part of the currency of Facebook is the network of users. So it's not just going, if I left Facebook because I didn't like it, I couldn't get those connections on another platform. And so it's really hard to replicate. The company's made a number of acquisitions, and one can argue that these acquisitions, such as WhatsApp, are helping its bottom line. But at the end of the day, a lot of its growth and a lot of its power comes from its organic growth as a company that connects people, which is what Mark Zuckerberg truly believes is the mission of this company. So it's really hard to imagine a competitor in that social network space being a viable option right now.
Tom, what do you make of Facebook's response to this particular story? They're really pushing back hard on it. They say they merely gave this information to manufacturers so that they could recreate Facebook-like experiences. One of the partners was Apple, and Tim Cook was on NPR talking about how we're not in the data business. We were just trying to make it easier for people to share a photo.
Right, we're not really doing anything with that information. I mean, the stakes are high right now for Facebook. It's very much in the crosshairs of a lot of lawmakers. We haven't talked about what they said because they want to know, were we lied to? Was Mark Zuckerberg, when he came and testified in DC several weeks back, was he telling the truth and being upfront about who has access to information on Facebook, these third parties, these device makers, etc.? Two, they're concerned about the consent decree. The FTC has handed down some ruling in 2011, and the question is whether these types of arrangements whereby device manufacturers do have access to certain information, are able to cull that information, is that something that is in violation of the FTC rulings, which could end up costing Facebook money, not so much money that it's going to hurt the company, but again, it's a PR nightmare. And you know, generally speaking, you are talking about a reputational damage that continues to happen and chip away at the company. So far, remember, Sheryl and Zuck have been very, very clear about saying this hasn't cost us hasn't cost us customers yet. The question is, if you keep hammering away at it, will it eventually happen?
Stefanie, do you think this violates that FTC consent decree? Is Facebook going to face a fine?
Yeah, I think probably they've violated that consent decree many different ways. First with the Cambridge Analytica developments, and now this. You know, the biggest fine that the FTC has handed out to date is $100 million. So if they wanted to make waves, they could do a record-setting fine, say, of $5 billion on Facebook. That's a rounding error to this company that had $40 billion cash on hand in 2017. So I do think there will be regulatory action. I do think it will feel meaningful to regulators, and I do agree there's reputational risk at stake. But from, you know, when I talk to investors, who cares?
Exactly. So, Tom, for $5 billion for a company of the size of Facebook, no big.
Not a big deal, exactly. And the question is, is there a viable alternative? If you leave Facebook, where do you go? And as we've talked about before, if you leave Facebook, a lot of people, where do they go? Well, they're going to Instagram. Well, guess who owns Facebook, right? So. And, you know, Twitter doesn't serve the same social purpose as Facebook.
Let's talk about the alternatives, Stefanie. I mean, you know, we have for years talked about, whether teens, are as attracted to Facebook as they once were. And there actually is some evidence that among younger users, Facebook is or has already lost its cool. What are some trends you're seeing in the younger demographic?
I think actually for many demographics, the richer content, whether it's photos or video, is what's most interesting and captures people's attention the most. And so this is the point. You know, Facebook is building out those platforms in its own branded platform, but also on Instagram and others. I think WhatsApp, even though it's not it's not like a social network tool per se, but it does help connect people for free. And maybe that's not as big of a deal in the United States when we are a big company with one network, but in a place like Europe that's facing different types of regulations, the ability to communicate via WhatsApp across a disparate continent of a number of different countries it actually provides some security for Facebook among skeptical users on that continent and here as well.
Tom, we're looking at potentially more regulation, especially in Europe. Is it going to happen?
Definitely. I mean, I think we are seeing an era where, particularly in Europe, you're going to find European regulators are going to find some creative way to make us think about privacy in a different way. In Germany, they're already talking about to what extent can we talk about privacy as an antitrust issue? Can we kind of repackage this idea of anti-competitive behavior and saying to Facebook, well, you can't force us to give up our privacy in exchange for letting us have access to your social network on which you have a monopoly. So I do think there's going to be some inventive, creative ways. You're hearing more and more about different approaches to antitrust here in the U.S. Again, though, everyone we talk to, analysts, investors alike, do see the prospect of regulation, but they see it as kind of, hurting Facebook around the edges, not really striking at the heart of its business model. And when you talk about Facebook's business model, advertisers, if they want to reach that mass of hundreds of millions of users, billions, when you add them up in total, where else are you going to be able to go? So advertisers really do still want to reach audiences through the Facebook platform, through the Google platform. Duopoly very much in place. Facebook is thinking about alternative business models. That Sarah Fryer broke the story about how they're wondering, they're exploring whether or not you want to have people, say if you don't want to see ads, there's going to be some other way that you can compensate
Pay
Facebook.
for a subscription.
Exactly. I'm not sure how popular that would end up being, but it would give people who are really concerned about privacy another way to continue to access Facebook. Does Facebook replicate the full amount of revenue? Who knows? I mean, subscription models are working for a lot of people.
All right. Our Bloomberg Tech executive editor, Tom Giles, and Stefanie Miller, analyst at Height Capital Markets. Thank you both.